Window and door frames. In this movie, we'll be looking at the window and door frame section of the NHE Plus. As the name suggests, we can enter all the details of the windows and doors that will be required on our job. When we enter the details of the window and door frames that we need, the NHE Plus will not only calculate the costs of these, it will also perform numerous calculations, around 800 in fact, in other sections of the pricing sheet, ensuring nothing is forgotten and everything's worked out. For example, it will deduct the labour, plant, hours and material costs of any wall items that are no longer required due to the windows and doors taking their place. In this quote, that will be the bricks, blocks, sand, cement and all the other associated items that will no longer be needed. At the same time, it will calculate all the materials, labour and hours for our lintels, any glazing, corner beads, window boards, cavity closers for the reveals, any associated fixings, and so on. Let's take a look at how straightforward all that number crunching is when using the NHE Plus. Type selection. Before we enter the window and door frames, we need to let the NHE Plus know what type of frame we want to use. Let's start with the window. Okay, so if we click this yellow box, we can see that we have 4 options to choose from: softwood, hardwood, plastic, and custom made. By default, it's set as plastic. If we look at the Windows description column, we can see that all of the options are plastic windows. Let's switch it to softwood. Straight away, the descriptions adjust and we have softwood options to choose from. It's important to note that if we select plastic frames, then the glazing will be included in the cost of the frame, as they're generally made as a whole unit. If we select softwood, hardwood, or custom made, then by default, the glazing will not be allowed and will be calculated in the glazing section. We repeat this same process with the door type. Use the drop-down menu and tell the program the type of door that's required. Let's select hardwood. See? Again, all of the default descriptions switch to hardwood choices. This applies to all of the door frames, including patio, French and garage. We're going to be using plastic window and door frames in this quote, so we'll switch these back to the plastic option. Entering window and door frames. Let's enter the doors and window frames we'll require. We'll start with the windows. The description of the window is here, followed by the width and height of it. We can change the description if something different is required, just use the drop-down menu. We'll notice that if we adjust the description, the width and height change on their own to match the description. We require 7 of these windows. Let's enter 7. The material cost of these windows is worked out, but we'll notice that the blue text here tells us that the labour costs and hours for the fitting of these windows has been moved to the first fix carpentry section. This is because we've opted to use dummy frames. This means that the fitting of these windows will be done after the walls have been constructed, during the first fix. So the programme knows that it needs to move the hours and labour costs for the fitting of them to the first fix carpentry section to ensure that all our reports, including our work schedule, are correct. As mentioned at the start, when we enter in window frames, the NHE Plus will deduct any wall items that are no longer required. So we also need to tell the programme which part of the walls these windows will be going into. If we click this drop-down menu here, we can see the names of the different wall sections. These windows are going in our main walls, so let's make sure that's selected. In this quote, as both our main walls and first floor walls are using the same brick and block construction method, it isn't quite so essential to do this, but it's extremely important to specify the section of wall that the window or door is going into if you have different sections of walls that have differing methods of construction. Okay, so let's put in the rest of our windows. So we check the description, enter the quantity, and tell the programme what section of wall they'll be going into. Now we have the door frames. These are broken down into further subsections, these being door, which is this one, patio, French, and garage door. All of them work in the same way. So let's look at the door frame. Okay, so we have the description. Like the windows, the width and height will be pre-filled based on the item description. We can choose a different material in this drop-down. Let's enter our front door here. Again, as dummy frames are selected, the labour costs and hours have been moved to the first fix. We check the section of walls that it's going to be built into. Below the door frame subsection, we have the doors subsection. As we've selected plastic doors, we can see that the door has not been calculated. The programme lets us know that the cost of it has been included in the above frame. Let's just switch to hardwood for our door type. See, as it's hardwood, the programme is allowing for the cost of the door and not including it with the frame. We'll also notice that the costs and hours for this hardwood door have been moved to first fix carpentry. It's important to note that unlike the door frames, the fitting costs and hours of the actual doors will always be moved to the first fix carpentry, regardless of whether the dummy frame option is ticked or not. Okay, let's switch this back to plastic and enter the rest of our door frames. We do have 3 patio doors to enter, so let's get those in. The door is allowed for in the frame, and these are going into our main walls. Dummy frames. Now we have entered the windows and doors that we require, we'll take a look at the dummy frame option, as this is the best way to see exactly how it works. When pricing work, it would be usual to set this before entering the window and door frame details. The dummy frame option is located here at the top of the window and door frame section. By default, the dummy frame option is switched on. This is indicated by this tick here. If the doors and window frames are being fitted after the walls have been constructed, then dummy frames will be required. This is often the case when plastic windows or door frames are being used. Okay, so we can see that dummy frames are switched on. The blue text explains what having this option on will do. We can also click the blue info icon for further details, or the blue question mark here for a pictorial reference of what a dummy frame is. As mentioned in the previous movie section, because we're using dummy frames, the labour costs and hours for the fitting of the actual window and door frames that we've entered has been moved to the first fix carpentry section of our pricing sheet, because that's when the fitting of them will take place. All the costs associated with the fitting of dummy frames are here in our window and door frames section. They have their own subsection called dummy frames. Let's take a look. Okay, so the first item is the dummy frame. This is the material that's going to be used. Here we can see the quantity. The programme has calculated this by looking at the quantities and dimensions of the window and door frames we've entered. The labour costs and hours are also worked out. The bracing for our dummy frames is here. Again, we can adjust the selected material and we can view the material cost. The blue text tells us that the labour and hours for the bracing is included in the dummy frames above. The fixings for the dummy frames are in the fixing for all the above subsection. If we click on the red question mark, we can see exactly how these are being worked out and adjust them if required. If dummy frames aren't needed, then we would just go back to the top of the window and door frame section and untick the box. Instantly, the programme calculates the labour costs and hours for the fitting of the frames here in the windows and doors frames section and removes these costs from the first fix. We're going to be using dummy frames, so let's switch this back on. Other frames. We do have the option to add in other frames if required. To use this option, begin at the left and select the material from the drop-down. We'll notice that the width and height match the description. Next, enter the quantity needed into the blue box. Then, enter the fitting hours in the blue box. Finally, specify the section of wall that this frame will be going into. We don't have any other frames in this job, so we'll just remove this from our quote. Frames not in walls. The Frames Not in Walls section enables us to enter the details of any frames that will be being built into existing walls. This option is most likely to be used on extensions. For example, if you're removing a wall to form a new opening from an existing building to an extension. The blue information icon does provide further details, but basically when we enter information in here, the programme will work out all the related items such as lintels, glazing, cavity closers, window boards and so on. But it will not deduct any of the wall items, for example bricks, blocks, sand and cement. We just select the type of frame from the drop-down menu, enter the quantity required, and finally the hours. As we're pricing a new build, we do not have any frames being built into existing walls, so we will remove this. Fixings. The fixings for all the above section is here. The fixings for the frames have been calculated. We can see the quantity and material cost. If we click the red question mark, we can see how these are being worked out, and if we want, adjust the default settings. The labour cost and hours for these fixings are built into the labour costs and hours for the actual frames. So if dummy frames are being used, the labour costs for these fixings will be in the first fix carpentry, or if the windows are being fitted whilst the walls are being constructed, these costs will be here in the window and door frame section. We can view how the fixings for the dummy frames are being worked out. If we weren't using dummy frames, there would be no costs in here. Again, the labour and hours for these fixings is built into the dummy frames costs here. The small tools that will be required have been automatically worked out for us, and the plant costs are here. Again, the labour costs and hours are included within the frames. Totals. The window and door frame section is pre-loaded with numerous items and is designed to cover every possible scenario. But if an additional item that isn't listed in this section is required, we are able to add it. To do this, just click the Extra Row button and follow the straightforward instructions. Full information on how to do this can be viewed by clicking the blue info icon. The totals for this section are here. They're broken down into plant, materials, labour and hours, and this is the overall total. We can click this button here and we'll be taken to the summary report, where we can see a snapshot of this section of the pricing sheet. To return to the pricing sheet, click this button.